Hello and welcome to Instant Transmission, a podcast where we discuss everything Dragon Ball and cool ways to piss off a fan base. Tonight, we tread new territory as we dig into the nitty-gritty of the latest Goku-focused release, Dragon Ball Daima. We've got a pile of notes, opinions, and numbers that we're definitely not qualified to look at. So strap in and get ready to get shook, because tonight we're doing a Dragon Ball Daima post-mortem episode. I'm your host, Dayton, and once again, I'm joined by my co-host, Todd.
Hi.
Tonight's episode is a pretty big departure from the norm. Daima is the first series that has been released since we started the Instant Transmission podcast, and we really wanted to dig into the numbers and see how it performed. We've broken the episode up into three rough parts: the before release marketing and reception, the during release handling and viewer retention, and finally the post release ratings and the rough success of Daima, since not all the information's completely out there yet. With all that covered, was there anything you wanted to add before we got things started, Todd?
I don't think so. I think we can start looking at the numbers.
All right, so we're going to go back in time a little bit, and we're going to go to the before release era of Daima, and we want to touch on the advertising and marketing and kind of what we were told Daima was going to be. And right off the bat, I need to point out that I was unable to find a dollar amount for the amount of money put into Dragon Ball Daima's marketing before released. Most sources I looked at didn't even have a guess, and the ones that did were all over the place. And to quote Google AI, while pinpointing the exact marketing cost of Dragon Ball Daima is impossible, it is reasonable to expect a significant investment in marketing to support its release. Which I don't know what the hell that means.
Yeah, I struggled to find anything in terms of dollar amounts. I will say that there were a number of news articles that came out during Daima's run that basically were stating that Toei Animation was not focusing on marketing for Daima, which I think as we dig into this a little bit more, we'll, even though we don't have the monetary numbers, we'll start to see evidence of that. And
go ahead.
I don't know. All of this has me a little bit baffled in terms of marketing for Daima, but did you find anything else about that?
No, because for me, the first real piece of marketing that I remember seeing was actually when Toei Animation announced Dragon Ball Daima at the New York Comic-Con panel on October 12th, 2023, so about a year before the release of Daima. This included the small teaser trailer that, as of this recording, has actually attracted over 10 million views. So that teaser trailer was actually really successful.
Yeah. So, and I mean, that's great. I think that there's a number of things behind that. One, of course, it being the Dragon Ball franchise, which is, has 40 years of success behind it. So, of course, new news of Dragon Ball content is going to draw some attention. I will say, though, that there are even videos on YouTube or on the internet of people very upset with the trailer when it was first released. So we'll dig into that a little bit more here shortly. But they also announced it. I don't think at that time, even with that trailer, by the time that trailer came out, they might have changed the name, because Dragon Ball Daima was originally marketed to us as Dragon Ball Magic, and they I think we were given like a promotional image of just Goku as actually no, when we knew about Dragon Ball Magic, I don't think we were even given like child Goku as a promo. So they shifted once they knew what Dragon Ball Magic was going to be to Daima representing the demon realm.
Yeah, and I mean, this teaser trailer, it wasn't very much, right? It was just a couple of scenes of, say, Goku with the power pole and a couple shots of mysterious characters, but I mean, it was doing what it was supposed to, which is just teasing what is supposed to come, and it didn't even have an exact date. It just said fall of 2024. And I suppose the point of this teaser was to try and give us some, I don't know, I guess original Dragon Ball vibes is kind of what I was getting from it. Where it's like, look, we've got the power pole, we got Kid Goku, we're going back to our roots. And for me, this was kind of because I remember you mentioning the magic stuff, but it all seemed like it was still up in the air, and it was hard to really draw any conclusions from it because it was so early. But this was the first time they gave us something to really sink our teeth into. And I think this is the first real like building block of them setting up expectations for Daima. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. We got to kind of see audience reception. I think the interesting thing for people was that this was, well, a lot of people were hoping for Dragon Ball Super, and this was, or Super 2, I guess, and this was not that. Um, but regardless, it got a lot of eyes on Dragon Ball Magic or Dragon Ball Daima moving forward. I think that they also pushed it. They definitely pushed Goku hard, like you said. The trailer was mostly Goku doing things. I think one of the big selling points too that they promoted very early on was that Akira Toriyama was going to be heavily involved in the production of Dragon Ball Daima.
I actually have because when they released that trailer, they also put an article up on the website. And this is where you'll probably remember seeing this. It's actually got the little card with Toriyama's caricature on there, like his avatar. And here's the quote, because I got it right here. It's "Hello, I'm Akira Toriyama. I'm currently working on a new Dragon Ball. The title is Dragon Ball Daima. Daima is a made-up term, which in Japanese characters would be, well, these characters, or in English would be something like evil. Due to a conspiracy, Goku and his friends are turned small. In order to fix things, they'll head off to a new world. It's a grand adventure with intense action in an unknown and mysterious world. Since Goku has to make up for his petite size, he uses his Niobo, or power pole, to fight, something not seen in a long time. I came up with the story and setting as well as a lot of the designs. That's like a big thing for Toriyama to say. And I'm actually putting a lot more into this than usual. Things will unfold that close in on the mysteries of the Dragon Ball world. Hope you all enjoy these different from usual battles that are cute and powerful." So, from Toriyama himself, he said he's putting a lot more into this than other series. So, for me, that also kind of raises expectations, right? Like, this should be something that's a little bit more special than maybe Super or other movies or Dragon Ball media we've seen.
Yes, 100%. And historically, Akira Toriyama's involvement in the anime or the movies, the specials, anything animated has been fairly minimal. Of course, Toei Animation has usually had the manga to go off of, and there is no Dragon Ball Daima manga. So it was interesting to hear that Toriyama was kind of working in the background as far as I think we find out later that it was a lot of the writing and the story and everything for Daima.
Yeah, and um here's something interesting I also found. So I went to the official Dragon Ball website and I just typed in Daima just to see what all the articles and stuff they had released leading up to the release of the movie. And honestly, there's not much. Um it's a few like references of like, oh, we're talking about something else, but also remember Daima's coming out. And then there's a couple like panels where they're like, hey, we're going to be at this con and there's going to be like a new character revealed or something. But as far as like advertisement campaigns or um crossovers with other like say studios or anything, like there's no real buzz that's being generated. It's just these Comic-Con announcements, or not Comic-Con, just con announcements. And then there was a partnership with a company called Uniqlo. It's a Japanese apparel company where they were making like shirts and stuff, but there was almost nothing on the official Dragon Ball website leading up to Daima until about September 3rd. So you're talking like several months where there's almost no marketing for Daima. And then that's when the official trailer drops about a month before the series releases. That's a huge like pile of time where you should be building, excitement and buzz. And honestly, unless you could find anything, I don't think there was any real advertisement for Daima.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, the thing about that trailer, this was like I guess the we got the teaser trailer at the New York Comic Con, and then we got this official trailer. This was by the time Daima, the name Daima for the series was well established now. They basically were promoting this with the trailer as the big celebration of the Dragon Ball 40th anniversary. So a full 40 years of Dragon Ball since the manga release in 1985, and we got a lot more visuals with other characters other than Goku. We get to see like young Vegeta. We get to see some of the characters like that we now know to be like Glorio and Degasu. Um, we get to see a little bit of some of like the fighting with the Noibo, and I think this was also, I believe it was the reveal of the opening song, John Jaka
Yeah, it
John.
was. Yeah. You get to reveal the opening song. There's also the teaser had no voice acting, just shots. This one you get Nizawa's. Did I say her name correctly?
Yeah,
You get her like iconic Goku voice actually voiced over this trailer. So I think that's to kind of it's I think exciting for a lot of people to hear her voice, and I thought it was very thoughtful and tasteful to let her, emote through it to let the audience connect in.
yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, this is, and actually, I'm trying to figure out the timing here because let's see, this one I think was it September 2024? Is that right?
This released September 3rd, 2024. So about a month before Daima's actual release. And one thing I want to point out is that the teaser got about 10 million views, or is sitting at 10 million views as of right now. This trailer has about 2 million views. So it's interesting that the teaser got about 5 times more viewership than the actual trailer did.
I think one of the things that, and we'll push into community reaction here soon, but one of the things that's important with that, I think, is that the teaser trailer turned a lot of people off with comparisons to GT, with Kid Goku, and all this stuff. So I wonder if that's why it has a lot fewer views, as well as, like you said, Dayton, there was a big gap in terms of marketing. I will say, I think some of that. So the reason I was asking about the timeline to confirm is because in 2024, in March, that was when Akira Toriyama passed away, and I think, admittedly, to give Toei Animation credit, I think there was a lot of like shifting gears in early and mid 2024, as they started to figure out like, okay, what's going to happen with the Dragon Ball franchise? What can we do to I mean, it sounded like they weren't finished with production for Daima, and now the creator is no longer there to help with it. So they had to figure out how to manage that. And then also, they, as we'll find with the actual release of Daima, they did a few things to pay tribute and homage to Akira Toriyama, which is great. So I think that some of that was the reason for that big gap, but I'm not sure that that's the whole reason.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. There's definitely a period there where it makes sense that there wouldn't be you'd be focused on other things, right? But you're talking about several months. I mean, they didn't put out really anything until a month before the series was going to be dropped. Um, and honestly, since we're kind of alluding to it, we can start bridging over to community sentiment at this point if that works for you.
Yeah, yeah, let's do it.
So, in my initial search is just for people who are talking on the internet at around that time, and from what I remember, is that the sentiment to Daima was generally good, but also a little polarizing. And kind of like what you mentioned, there was a lot of comparisons that were being made to Dragon Ball GT, but at the same time, I think a lot of people were just happy to have new Dragon Ball content. So, as much as there were some concerns, it seemed like people were mostly excited for it.
Yeah, I think so. I think it also took time for people to kind of get used to the idea of Daima. Like the people who were actually going to watch it were probably people that were like initially disappointed that it wasn't a continuation of Dragon Ball Super. But I mean, even myself, like I was kind of bummed, and then I was also had the initial like, it looks like another GT. But I think once that initial shock kind of settles in, a lot of the fan base was like, okay, well, I want to give this a shot and see what it's like.
Well, when I was doing my marketing research, when I just Googled Dragon Ball Daima marketing, the number one results on my list was actually a Reddit thread of a guy talking about the lack of marketing for Dragon Ball Daima. He said the title of it was Daima is coming out in like 2 months and the marketing has been absolutely abysmal. And his comment was, WTF, are they not confident in this anime or what? Why is it that we have barely seen any promotion for this new series? So people, I mean, mind you, that I didn't look for this. This was the number one in my Google search. And there was some conversation happening. Well, the general response was it's Dragon Ball, so it doesn't need to be advertised. While others mentioned that the series received no marketing because maybe the studio didn't expect it to do super well since it was like a mini offshoot series. Like, I think people were kind of confused in some ways too about what the expectation for Daima was.
I admittedly kind of had I found that same Reddit thread, and I kind of had that same response as there were like I think a dozen people commenting on there saying like, "Oh, it's Dragon Ball, it'll do fine. Like they don't need to advertise." I kind of had that same thought initially until I started seeing the numbers for Daima, and I I mean, I was wrong as well as those people on the Reddit thread, to be frank. I think the marketing has really hurt Daima's numbers here, unfortunately.
Yeah, and just the amount of engagement you would expect to find, like people talking about it or what they're excited about or what they don't like. There honestly wasn't as much, like the threads didn't go as deep as maybe for things I looked at for Dragon Ball Super or anything like that. People were excited about the clean animation. They were excited about Toriyama being very hands on. I think that was probably one of the biggest things I saw is people were really excited that Toriyama was going to be hands on in this project. And even though they had their concerns, like, well, it's Toriyama, he's actually working on it and it should be decent. And I think there's a lot of that, like, we have concerns, but we'll put a pin in it because there's also a lot of signs that this could be great. But it wasn't just this wasn't as easy for me to dig into because there just wasn't as many people talking about it. And I think honestly that reflects in the marketing. Like people weren't hyped up.
And I think that's a great point. The fact that it's hard to find these comments, these details about how the community felt about Daima is kind of an indication that the community was not all that excited for Daima. Um, it, I like you said, there was such a big gap in terms of marketing that it's like, okay, well, you kind of gave us this tease and got people excited or outraged, uh, but then nothing for months, and people are gonna forget about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm going to compare that with my own feelings because when I first saw the teaser trailer, I said, "All right, I don't have enough here to know whether I should be excited or not, but Power Pool's cool. There could be some fun stuff in here." And I agreed that there's probably some GT. I haven't seen GT, but I have pictures in my head I think of when I think of GT, and one of them is Kid Goku, and that does make me nervous. Also, I kind of got the vibe that they were trying to cater towards new Dragon Ball viewers, like people who haven't seen Dragon Ball before. And I was worried that this was going to be a very watered down series, more designed to onboard people into the Dragon Ball universe. So, as someone who's watched the series for years or decades at this point, I was a little bit worried that this was going to be kind of like Dragon Ball Light or Diet Dragon Ball. That was one of my initial feelings going into this.
Yeah, I man, my feelings changed quite a bit over like before Daima and into Daima and after. I initially had the scare of like, well, initially the a slight disappointment that we weren't getting super continued and following the manga story. I seeing Kid Goku definitely gave me this idea of like, oh man, are we getting a GT remake? Like GT is not very well liked amongst the Dragon Ball fan base, and I have quite a few problems with it myself. And admittedly, though, I think once that settled for me, I love Dragon Ball. I was gonna watch Daima no matter what it was. It didn't matter. Um, and I think after especially seeing the trailer that came out in September 2024, the official trailer, there was a lot there that made me very excited. The animation looked fantastic. The snippets of action scenes that we saw looked really really fun. I think that it showed it was reminiscent of Dragon Ball in its like grounded martial arts stuff, at least in the tiny pieces that we got to see, which was really cool. And the different unique characters and character designs with like Glorio and Dr. Arinsu, even though we didn't have their names necessarily, they all looked fun and interesting. And I like the idea of exploring the demon realm. Like the demon realm to me is really fun and cool. And we hadn't really gotten to see a lot of it in Dragon Ball lore up to this point. So I was pretty excited. Like the more and more we got close to the release, I was pumped. Like maybe even too excited.
Yeah, and I don't know. The way I put it down here is I feel like my expectations were kind of low, but my hopes were high. Like there was a lot of potential for this to be an amazing series, but there was also a lot of potential for this to be another GT. So as high as my excitement was, my nerves were high too. I was kind of this needed to release that way I could figure out where I was sitting because I was getting mixed signals. And honestly, I could probably take whichever side I wanted to. Like there was a good argument that this is going to be great, or we're doing another like side adventure Kid Goku time.
And that was the other thing that that I didn't bring up either is the spot in the timeline where this takes place. That was hitting me. That part I didn't like. I liked that it was a continuation of Z because Z is probably my favorite piece of Dragon Ball. But I also didn't like that because it meant that the events of Daima there could be no stakes because we need to go from Z to Super. So whatever happens in Daima has to get us to the point that we start in Super. So nobody else can die or nothing crazy, world ending or life changing can really happen in Daima. So that part was my excitement was super high, but that part kind of like tempered it a little bit for me.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think this is gonna roll us into the release time. Daima's out. We're in the middle of the release. Um, and yeah, the first question I had is Daima meeting expectations set by marketing? And I will say at the beginning of Daima, absolutely. It started out strong with a return to like normal original Dragon Ball roots in a lot of aspects. You've got a main villain who's a short little evil man who wants to rule the world, who has, like royal heritage or something. Emperor Pilaf to Goma. I think these are very comparable characters. Um, our forces are all pint sized and going on an adventure. The world is made in a way to bring down the power level and bring everyone to more, fists and punches rather than ki blast. I think the beginning of Daima is kind of perceived really well, at least from what I was seeing.
Yeah, 100%. I would very much agree with that. The I mean, the first couple of episodes, like the first one is pretty much a setup episode, and then we get more into the action and the meat of the story in the next couple of episodes, and I fell in love with it. Like getting to see the reanimated Z sequences at the beginning of the first episode, they looked absolutely phenomenal. Um, I think that, and we're talking about the original Japanese release. First time everybody's getting to experience this, whether it's a Japanese or American or otherwise audience. Um, I think it basically met expectations and even exceeded them, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I'm gonna go through some of the numbers here in a second, because we get midway through the series and things change. According to comic book resources and Konsenshu, they quote this company. It's called videoR.co.tv rating. So it's a company that does the TV ratings in Japan specifically. So I'm not talking about the US, I'm talking about Japan because we have those numbers. And the average individual audience rating for Dragon Ball Daima episode 13 is where things kind of fall apart. It was below 1%, and the average household audience rating was below 2%. Under these statistics, episode 13 failed to rank, which means it did not break into the top rankings of viewership for people in Japan. And the way these statistics kind of work is you have your average TV rating and then household. So usually households have multiple TVs. I'm just going to go with households. How many households were watching this? Well, not enough to make it into top viewership. So the first uh 10 episodes, by the way. So I went and looked into these numbers even deeper. Out of the first 10 episodes, 9 of them made it into the top 10 in viewership. So they were wildly popular. And then after the first 10 episodes, about half of them make it into top viewership. So you start seeing this big fall off after the first 10 episodes. It seems like, at least in the Japanese audience, midway through the series, they kind of started falling off and not continuing the series.
Yeah, I found that same website that you were talking about, the Konsenshu guys did a good job of posting all this information, and it's interesting because this data is specifically for the TV broadcast. I don't think that it counts streaming. I think that Vegito EX, I think, is the guy who posted a lot of this stuff, and he mentions that it doesn't count like the streaming data. I wish I couldn't find it. I don't know if you could, Dayton, but I wish that I could find numbers as far as streaming data. This was the closest thing that I could find, but it's still a good indication that Daima was doing well early on and things started to kind of fall off. And not to harp on our favorite episode, but episode 8 is the Tamagami 3 fight. So it's funny and telling to me that that dip in the middle, which I think Dayton and I have extensively kind of expressed our dislike for, that seems to be a similar feeling for the audience and the reception of the show, is that that dip in the middle of Daima just kills it for some people.
Yeah, and it it was kind of, for me, it was kind of refreshing to see that data because it matched up with how I felt about the series. The parts that I thought were good, it seemed like people tuned in and watched, and the parts that I didn't think were that great or could have been better, it seems like people tuned out on. Like, you can almost see the reverse bell curve of viewership where people were all there at the beginning and then they fall off in the middle, and then I think like the last 3 episodes all made it into that top 10. So people came back to see the conclusion of the series. And the at least the TV data in Japan reflects that everyone's seeing the same thing, at least from a viewership standpoint.
It's funny because I found another site that had, it didn't show the numbers, but it had just a graph of viewer numbers, and the graph showed like high numbers towards like the first 8 to 10 episodes. Actually, yeah, it was through like episode 8, like real high, a dip in the next couple of episodes, a big spike for what I believe was Vegeta's episode, and then a huge dip for the next set of episodes until you get to the last 3, and then it spiked up higher than any other episode.
Well, I think because I think I heard about the Vegeta spike as well. I think that proves that people aren't just tuning out until it gets to the end. People are actually reading and hearing about the things that are happening in Daima and then tuning in if they think it's worth their time. And unfortunately, it looks like between all the reviews and articles that were being posted, they were able to kind of decide that, yeah, this content's not worth me watching. I have only so much time in the day, and I'm not going to sit and watch a filler episode of Daima. Or if only one thing happens during an episode, I can just read that note on an article, while I'm on the can or something, and then save myself the 20 minutes later.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think I certainly saw it in real time during the last 3 episodes, where my YouTube algorithm was just fucking chock full of people talking about Daima, of certainly like spoiler images for YouTube thumbnails of, and if you haven't watched Daima, I don't know why you're listening to this, but spoiler, of Super Saiyan 4 Goku, of Super Saiyan 3 adult Vegeta, And yeah,
Well,
I
you told
think
me to mute our Discord because there people were talking about all the spoilers and stuff, and I hadn't gotten to it yet.
yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, so yeah, I think you're absolutely right that people see that stuff online. They either see articles or videos, and they're like, "Oh, now I want to go watch Daima."
Yeah, and I mean it's such a departure from what we experienced when we were kids, right? Like we didn't have all the streaming services and anything, so we were watching every episode of DBZ because there was nothing else to do. But nowadays, there's so much competition. If if you're putting out like a bad product or a subpar product, I can watch a different show and then just come back to your good parts. Like there's so much information parsing to where I can just watch the pieces that I need to watch and then go on with my day. I don't need to sit there for every episode.
Yeah, which is it's funny because Daima's not even it's not a long series, right? But in a world where we've got YouTube shorts and TikToks and all this stuff, like people's attention spans are real minuscule. So if you don't keep their attention, people are gonna stop and go consume some other media. There's millions of hours of it out there.
Well, I
And
think you had mentioned it too while we were watching Daima that you knew people that had checked it out and stopped watching it or said that they would come back to it or they were just going to wait for the whole thing to release. So the things that we've read and the data kind of lines up with what we were hearing from people we knew too.
yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, and I don't know. I don't know if the retention has much to do with the marketing itself, but there the quality of Daima, as much as I really like parts of it, that middle part is just a struggle for most people to get through. Even myself, I was like, that episode felt like I wasted my time, which is really just a bummer.
Especially when you know that it's only a 20 episode series. Like, all right, well, where's this thing going if you think you've got time to kill?
Yes, yeah, 100%. Um, I think we could probably
Oh,
start.
getting to the spicy dub release content.
Oh man, because this is very telling of some problems with the marketing.
Yeah. So the English dub for Dragon Ball Daima started off as a movie, which premiered in U.S. theaters on November 8th, 2024, almost a month after the initial release of the sub, which is already uh, so many questions on its face. Why is it a movie? Why is it releasing late? On top of that, there wasn't really marketing for it. It was a limited release, so it wasn't even in most theaters. I don't know what the hell was going on with this dub release, but it's probably one of the worst I've ever seen.
I want to add to that. Not only did it come out 1 month after the original release of like the Japanese release of Daima, they released in America the English dub, the first 3 episodes on November 8th in theaters, and then we didn't see anything else from the dub until January 10th in America. And
Oh, I
that
didn't
was
realize it was
starting
that
it.
big of a jump. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so 2 months after the release of that movie theatrical release, to say nothing of the fact that it's 2 months with the holidays in there, giving people plenty of time and plenty of reason to 100% forget about Daima in that time. In addition to that was starting at episode 1, which if anybody saw episodes 1 through 3 in the theaters, they would have to now wait 3 more weeks to even get to a point where they're seeing new content.
And not to mention, the movie release saw, from what I was able to find, a gross total of $661,000. This is one of the lowest grossing movies I have ever seen.
That was I found that same number. I will say, while I agree with your statement there, I will say that there's also a few other things going on here in that it's not really a movie. It's 3 episodes of an anime, so like there's a bit of a difference there. It's also anime releases in the States have never done particularly well. I suppose if we wanted to compare it to like like a Demon Slayer or something, I'm sure that the numbers are are vastly different. Um,
So for comparison, the Dragon Ball superhero movie grossed 95.8 million USD, and the Broly movie grossed 93.7 million USD. So you're talking about like an almost actually more than 100x difference.
yeah,
Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry, a 10x difference, more than a 10x difference. I'm bad at math here.
Admittedly, yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like those are wild numbers. I, I think it's a combination of things. Like I'm not wiping away the terrible marketing, but there is also a difference between like 3 episodes of a series versus like an actual movie and theatrical release for it. But that I think it could have still done much better, especially if there was not a 2 month gap between the actual dub release and the theatrical release.
See, I agree with everything you said, but I think those are all good reasons as to why this never should have been released as a movie in the first place. This feels, I don't know. The end of episode 3 is a fine spot to stop at, but it doesn't feel like a complete cohesive like story arc that's hooked me in. It also doesn't feel necessary because it's not really offering any new content. It's not like say the Dragon Ball Super Series movies, like the Battle of Gods or something, where it's the same content, but it's amazing. Like it's an amazing different interpretation than what the series had. This is literally just the cut and paste episodes into movie format. It feels so confusing to me. If anything, I think having a release like this almost feels more damaging to Dragon Ball than it does like promoting it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a big problem with it is again that people are going to go watch that in theaters and then they'll be maybe initially excited and then they'll completely forget about it. Like they'd be I think the hype would be better off just like you said, wiping that theatrical release, even if you have this big gap from like the Japanese release in October to the dub release in January. Some people are just waiting for the dub anyway. So they'd be better off just being like, oh, cool, the holidays are over. Daima's out. I'm going to sit down and watch Daima rather than being like, oh, yeah, I started Daima and you know, I forgot about it. I don't want to have to sit through those first 3 episodes again and then start to get caught back up.
Yeah. So the dub release was, I don't know, at best slow, and at worst I would say completely botched. But uh, man, I don't know what they're doing. Eventually I'll go back and revisit it and see what my opinion is, but as far as its schedule and the way it was handled, I don't give them a passing grade on this. I don't know about you.
I want to add to that. There were other anime like Dan to Dan and other things coming out that were really popular that were getting a simulcast Japanese with English subtitles and English dub. So basically releasing at the same time. Why is Dragon Ball not getting that treatment? That makes no sense to me. It's one of the biggest, highest grossing anime franchises of all time. Why are we not getting the dubs at the same time as the Japanese release? Like that's crazy.
Yeah, just the handling of this, I don't know. It could have been a lot better. And honestly, it would have been more hype if people all over the world were all talking about Daima at the same time. But instead, this audience is getting it. And then, some people are willing to watch subs, so they're getting it. And then later, this audience is going to get it. And I don't know, like the hype's kind of over at that point. It just feels bungled.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I also wouldn't be surprised too. Like we're talking about the dip in viewership. Um, some people like I imagine probably you and I would have even watched the dub just because that's what we grew up with. But because the dub came out so much later, we watched the sub. I could see some other people doing that too, and then even having more reason to kind of to kind of fall off of the show because they're like, it isn't. I'm having to watch the Japanese and I have to read the subtitles and it's not the voices that I remember. So
You don't
like
have
I could see
nostalgia keeping you interested.
exactly. I could see that also being a reason for a lot of people dropping off.
Yeah, and I think was there anything else you wanted to cover during the release era of Daima?
No, I think we can probably move on to the post release.
Yes, and we're gonna get right into the community ratings and see how many people rated it and how they felt about it, and just to kind of set the timeline here. The final episode of Daima released on February 28th, 2025. We are recording this episode on April 27th, so it's been about 2 months since the conclusion of the series. We felt that this should be enough time for people to actually watch the series and give their opinion. So there's been some time for, because I know a lot of people wait for a full series to come out and then binge the whole thing. So all those people should have gotten in their watch time and gotten their reviews out. So we think this is a good time for us to do this post Daima review. And from what I was seeing, Daima was liked by the majority of the community posting their reviews online, at least from what I could find. And just to give you some audience scores from popular websites, IMDb gave it a 7.9 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes gave it 81% out of 100. And my anime list gave it a 7.66 out of 10. So, I mean, that's generally good. That none of that's close to 5, which is average. This is an above average anime from what everyone's watching.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the other things to even look at too is that it's its ratings compared to some of the other series in within just Dragon Ball itself. Like my anime list is a big one that I reference for anime in particular, but Dragon Ball Z, I think is probably the highest rated one on my anime list as far as Dragon Ball goes. It's at an 8.2. Um, I forgot to look. I'm gonna just double check for Dragon Ball, and so Dragon Ball itself has a 7.98. GT has a 6.51, and Super has
Woo!
a yeah, Super has a 7.46. So Daima's beating out GT and Super. It's not beating out the original Dragon Ball or Z, but it's right in the middle of the pack. So I mean, people at least like it more than GT and Super, which is interesting.
Well, let me give you some more numbers that are interesting because I went and used the Wayback Machine to try and get data from websites at about a same length amount of time out from when that series had released. So, what was it? Super finished in 2018, was it? So I used
Yeah.
the Wayback Machine to grab data from anywhere from 2018 to 2020 in that range because there wasn't always something available, but within a couple of years. So to try and slim down the amount of time people had to review, and uh, the results are a little bit all over the place. So comparing Dragon Ball Super to Daima on IMDb, Super actually had an 8.1 compared to Daima 7.9, and they both had about 16,000 people reviewing them. So they're actually very similar as far as how people felt right after release, anyway. So at least in IMDb. On Rotten Tomatoes, uh, the audience gave Super a 70% out of 100 versus Daima's 81%. So people seem to enjoy Daima a little bit more on that website. But this is where things get really spicy. On my anime list, it had a 7.41. That's Dragon Ball Super. And then Daima had that 7.66. So they're within zero point 0.2 of each other. They're neck and neck. They're basically the same rating as far as I'm concerned. The big difference is 455,000 people reviewed it on my anime list for Super, and 44,000 people reviewed it on Daima. So 10 times as many people left ratings for Dragon Ball Super as they did for Daima.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And it's there's
And I
a
use the
number of
Wayback Machine, so we're talking about comparable timelines going out from the conclusion of the anime.
right. Oh, I see what you're saying. I guess one of the other like Daima's 20 episodes, right? And Super is 150 or so. Um, I mean, Super had a run of 3 years, whereas Daima's run was a few months. So there's also there's also that to take into consideration. Like Super had a lot more time to like build up an audience and whatnot. Um, I don't know. It's interesting. I think there is something there though to say that people were much more interested and invested in Super.
Well,
And I
do you want some
mean,
more interesting facts?
yeah, go for it.
All right. So I also got in Google Trends and started comparing them, how much interest was generated over these, right? So now we're just talking about Google searches, people looking up information, how much people are looking into these series. And over the last year, right? So this would just be basically all the Daima hype. Daima comes out, people are looking up Daima stuff. Dragon Ball Daima has had more peak interest than Dragon Ball Super, but Super has had more overall interest than Daima. So there's two peaks to Super at the start of the series in October and at the end of the series in February, where there's more interest in Daima than Dragon Ball Super. But outside of that, people are Googling Dragon Ball Super more than Daima the rest of the year.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I will add one of the other things that kind of works in Super's favor here a little bit is it's also a manga. Like people I think that the anime is definitely more popular than the manga is, but it's just another avenue or reason that people will be searching up Dragon Ball Super, right? Whereas Daima doesn't have that going for it. And I'm saying these things just to kind of point them out and like get them out into the air. I still think that a lot of this is pointing to the fact that the marketing and the reception for Daima has not been great.
Well, I mean, I appreciate because it's just making sense of the data, right? Like, here's the data. How do we get to the spots? Like, well, some of this interest is going to be because you have a manga behind this anime series. So already right off the bat, people are going to be more interested in it because there's already a market of people that are going to naturally go into this. So you're right. Daima doesn't have that backing that the Super Series had, and even right now, like you said, people are. Well, it's interesting, right? So it probably means that all those searches are probably more related to the manga than it is the actual Dragon Ball series. Um, so it's entirely possible that the manga is probably more popular than uh, the Dragon Ball Daima animated series.
Ooh, maybe. I don't know. I feel like I feel like there's definitely a bigger audience for animation in general. It's just an easier medium to consume. I but I think the manga is certainly helping pad those super numbers for sure. I mean, if people are following like the super manga, for instance, they are probably also going to watch the anime. But Daima doesn't have that. Daima doesn't have an audience that's already reading the manga who are then also going to watch the anime.
Well, and just to push the data a little bit further, um, when you compare the amount of interest, so Google searches regarding the series during its run, so from start to end, and you compare the highs and lows, the lowest point during Super's run is higher than the highest point in Daima's run. And on top of that, Dragon Ball Super's highest peak was almost 8 times as much as Daima's highest peak. So it's insane how much of a behemoth. Like, I walked away with this with going, wow, Dragon Ball Super was way more popular than I thought it was. And honestly, I kind of thought Daima was a little bit more pop. I thought those two would have been a little bit more comparable than what I was expecting, but Dragon Ball Super was a behemoth of a release.
Those are very interesting numbers, and that's wild. I I'm kind of your that data is great, and I'm trying to kind of like vocalize and rationalize it all out as you're talking about that because thinking on Super, its release in 2015, shortly after I think we had the release of the Battle of Gods movie, and then the Resurrection F movie, and then Super, and all of that was like a new renaissance for Dragon Ball, basically, right? Like we hadn't had Dragon Ball content for 10, 15 years prior to that. So that was hitting the Dragon Ball fan base hard and heavy. And that was great. I think that was some of the success for Super. Whereas Daima, there was a little bit of a gap. I think the last thing that we had was probably the superhero movie, which would have been, oh, I think 2 maybe 3 years, 2.5 years. I think it was 2022 in March maybe. Um, so 2.5 years before the release of Daima. So there's a gap there, but certainly not like a 10 to 15 year gap. It's not like the pining and desire for Dragon Ball content that we had was super. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's those numbers though are insane. Like the fact that Super was so much more popular and so much more watched than Daima. I think it again. I think it comes back to the poor way that it was marketed.
Yeah, I think I man, and I think I might agree with the community on this one. I think Toei just expected the Dragon Ball name to do all the marketing they needed, and I think they gambled on that, and I think they lost. I don't think they got the viewership that they probably that honestly the series probably deserved. It's a pretty decent series, and I think more people should put eyeballs on it. Um, the criticisms are correct. I think it falls apart in the middle of it, but it's not a bad series by any means, and I think the lack of marketing kind of set it up for failure.
I totally agree. One of the other things I will add to that is that I saw online through my research that people were saying that Toei and even other anime companies or animation companies, a lot of times they won't spend a lot of money in marketing because the anime, they don't make a lot of money off of that. They make money off of products like toys, action figures, manga, whatever. And I don't know. My thing is like, okay, well, sure, you're going to make money off of your products. Well, you want your series like the anime in a way is a marketing for those products. So like why would you not invest in marketing for the anime, which is then marketing your products? Like Daima, for instance, there are action figures out there for like mini Goku, for mini Vegeta. I'm sure there's now going to be action figures for Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta, Super Saiyan 4 Goku, maybe even characters like Goma, Glorio, Dr. Rinsu. So again, it's like I feel like Toei, you're shooting yourself in the foot by not putting in the work and the money to market Daima.
Yeah, and I don't know. This might be going back to that kind of old line of thinking I mentioned where like you got home and you watched Dragon Ball, it was on TV, like you're going to watch it no matter what. It's just not that way anymore. Where putting your show on TV means people are going to watch it. Like people can kind of a la carte watch whatever content they want. And so you need to do something to get people thinking about your content, thinking about clicking the play button because it's not like just buying the best time slot and calling it a day anymore. And I'm wondering if Toei Animation kind of needs to catch up to modern times a little bit and not just expect the product to sell itself because I think before you could get away with that, but in the current age, you've got to be competitive. You got to get people to try and prefer your product over another product because you can't just buy time slots anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Two things to add to that is that one, I think Kensenshu specified that Daima was airing at a new time slot than any of the other previous Dragon Ball content. So that might have messed up Daima's reception a little bit as well. Um, the other thing, my brain is totally drawn a blank on now. Um, but yeah, it's oh, the other thing I was going to mention is that I get the strong feeling that Toei, while there are, it's a big company that and they outsource a lot of their animation and things like that to other smaller companies. One Piece is probably their biggest seller and their biggest cash cow presently. In fact, I'm positive it is. I've seen, numbers as far as it's like the biggest grossing anime franchise right now. And while Dragon Ball is big, I mean, people have lost interest in Dragon Ball over the years for things like Demon Slayer or One Piece. And since Toei makes One Piece as well, there's almost certainly a larger focus on One Piece. And I think Dragon Ball just kind of gets like the crumbs or the leftovers as a result.
Well, it's interesting too because if you look at some of the numbers that they put in their financial releases, uh Dragon Ball does Dragon Ball does better, what is it? Domestically, but One Piece does better overseas, or one of the two, where Dragon Ball and One Piece have inverse performances where one does better in one area and one does better in the other. Um because I got it down here because I did read through this. But yeah, they perform different in different markets depending on what you're looking at. So I think actually One Piece does better overseas is what I was looking at. And
So,
like America's a big market, and so that makes them a lot of money. Whereas like Dragon Ball does better there or something like that.
okay. Yeah, I'd be curious which one it is specifically, because I'm trying to think like I'm not a big fan, or I'm not into the One Piece fan base, so I don't know as much about that. I I'm trying to speculate though in my head. Like, I mean, Dragon Ball is huge in like Mexico and Latin America.
Yeah,
Like Dragon
that's what
Ball's
it is. So Dragon Ball performs better overseas than it does domestically.
that makes sense.
Um and One Piece is actually the reverse. So depending on which financial form you're looking at, if you're looking at um their local like finances, not the overseas, just their local finances, you'll actually see that One Piece outperforms Dragon Ball in Japan. And then if you look at overseas performance, you'll see that typically on your average given year, Dragon Ball is going to outperform One Piece.
That does not surprise me. I mean, Dragon Ball has just established itself in other countries so heavily as like there are millions of people outside of Japan in like America, Mexico, wherever, who don't know anything about anime, but almost certainly know Dragon Ball.
Well, and I kind of
Like,
want to tie that into like our feelings and our friends' feelings at the end of the Daima series, because when Daima closed, I walked away with some very mixed feelings. And on top of that, the I talked to a lot of people who are actually a lot like me, who we're not huge anime people, but we'd watch Dragon Ball. We'll watch some of the top anime. Like it's anime is just another form of watching television. Basically, it's something that entertains me. So we're not, I say, huge in the entire anime eco universe or whatever you want to call it. And I don't think I had a single person who I showed the trailer to express interest in watching the series. Like, I don't think it drew in any of my casual friends.
yeah, which is wild. I've so I'm a huge weeb. I'm big into the anime ecosystem. The I've talked to a number of people, either friends or even just people that I've met, who see me wearing like a Dragon Ball shirt, and they're like, "Hey, have you watched Daima?" Blah blah blah. Um, and so most of my experience though is that a lot of people in real life were telling me that they watched Daima for a while and then dropped it. Most of that expressing that it was either too slow, it was boring, something to that effect. And there were very few people that I spoke to in real life who told me that they were like excited about Daima or they finished Daima. In fact, I can't think of anybody, which is wild.
Well, I even pitched it to my wife, and uh, when she saw it, she's like, I'll think about it. I'll consider it." It was one of those things where, yeah, we can just go downstairs and watch. And she's like, "I don't know," and She was a big fan of Dragon Ball just like I was when we were growing up. She had like posters and stuff like that in her room of like Cell and Trunks and all that stuff. So I mean, she was a big Dragon Ball fan growing up, and I don't know what it was about the trailer or teaser or whatever, but for some reason it just didn't. And maybe that's it. Is I don't think she's really watched the original Dragon Ball series. I think she's only really seen Z. And if you're like us and you grew up on Z, this isn't the same thing as Dragon Ball Z. This is a different experience, and so it's not going to pull me in maybe the way a more Dragon Ball Z oriented series would have drawn me in.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Because I was super excited, but I've also watched everything there is to watch Dragon Ball basically. So yeah, I think I did have a few friends that did ask about the dub and when the dub was going to be like out. So there's some people who are, who only want to watch it dubbed. Um yeah, it's
Man, would have been nice if the dub released alongside the subs. That way, everybody of different, interest groups could all watch it together.
yeah, like you and I, Dayton, finished watching this months ago, and I have some friends who are just now getting into the dub, and yeah, it's kind of a bummer because they're probably going to be excited to talk about it, and while I'll still be excited to talk about it because I love Dragon Ball, it's like I was excited to talk about it 2 months ago, or 3 or 4.
Or and if you're one of those people, and I'm kind of that way where I prefer the dub over the sub, if you're waiting for the dub to come out, that's a lot of time for spoilers to come across your news feed.
That's a really good point. Because, like I said, my YouTube was full of spoilers. Not even just my YouTube, my Google algorithm, everything was just.
Dude, the Google stuff was pissing me off because you'd open up like a new tab and it's trying to spoil it. You're like, oh no, get out of here, go away. I've not searched anything about this. Stop showing me it.
It's super frustrating. That is a pet peeve of mine about spoilers and the internet these days, as it is. But it's exacerbated by the fact that we've got such a big staggered release between the sub and the dub.
Yeah, and kind of one of the last things I want to talk about too is the budget and financial performance of Daima because I had a hard time finding numbers on this. Um, I couldn't find anyone who gave a solid number. There were some wild guesses all over the place. Google AI gave it a guess of somewhere between 8.5 and 15 million. And I don't know. I guess I could see it being in this range because Dragon Ball Super had a budget of about $160,000 per episode. Um, and this is a better looking series than Dragon Ball Super. It's also had a longer lead up, more involvement from more creative minds. So this is probably a more expensive per episode series than Super, especially since since the lockdowns and stuff, inflation's been crazy. So stuff's just more expensive anyway. I wouldn't be shocked if the cost per episode of this series was double the cost per episode of Dragon Ball Super.
Yeah, 100%. I was struggling to find numbers on this as well. I found a few pieces that kind of corroborated what you just expressed, Dayton, but it's hard to get this data down. I was even trying to find or I think Google AI gave me something about actually saying something along the lines of like Daima had made slightly more than it compared it to One Piece, and I was like, that sounds like horseshit. So it's just hard to find this data. I wish that we had more information about like the streaming numbers and more information about the revenue, but I don't. I just don't think Toei Animation puts that data out there, and maybe that's common. It's just I don't think, based on what we've seen on the numbers for Daima, I have a feeling that it did not do well in terms of revenue.
Well, I was able to find some of their domestic numbers, and just the way they have it labeled is how much did the Dragon Ball franchise bring in this year? They just put it all in one big soup, right? So it doesn't matter if it's you bought a Dragon Ball Z toy, that just goes into Dragon Ball profits, and that's just kind of the way they put the graphs out. And I thought this was interesting that there was a 25% increase in overall revenue um, from 2023 going into 2024. So 2024 produced 25% more revenue. And that's interesting because nothing released in 2023 for Dragon Ball. And you would almost expect there to be kind of a bigger jump going from nothing to something as far as the Dragon Ball universe goes. So it seems like, and there's a lot of numbers I looked at here. I'm not qualified enough to really understand the exact meaning, but just kind of looking at them, it seemed like Daima was technically a success, but realistically, it probably didn't hit any of the metrics that they were aiming for. It didn't seem like there was a huge jump in Dragon Ball sales, whether that be toys, merchandise, or anything. But it didn't bomb, right? They still did get the increase in the bump, but I don't think this was kind of the slam dunk home run that they were looking for.
No, and yeah, to your point, I feel like Daima could have been way more popular, could have made way more money if it had been handled a little bit better. And yeah, I mean it like you said, based on the numbers that it made money. It made a splash in Dragon Ball revenue, but I really feel like it could have been so much more. I'd be also very curious. Like you said, we're kind of speculating on the the amount of money spent to create Daima. I mean they spent a lot of time leading up to the release of Daima, producing it. They didn't give themselves like 3 months like they did with Super. They gave themselves a year plus, maybe even closer to 2 years. And I mean that's time, that's money. Like I wish we would have been able to find like the numbers for how much it costs to make either an episode of Daima or the whole thing versus how much money the show specifically brought in, or even the show as far as like the number that you got, Dayton, is good because it's also Daima itself. Even if the show specifically doesn't bring in money, it's bringing attention to Dragon Ball, and it's going to get people spending more money on Dragon Ball. Period. Which is, I mean, it's great for Toei. It's great for the Dragon Ball franchise. Um, yeah, I mean, there's more to it than just what money did the show make, I guess is the point.
Yeah, and kind of continuing what you were saying, it's kind of weird that we don't have any of those numbers. Usually you hear about budget and all that stuff before the show even comes out. And here we are sitting, months after the conclusion and we still don't know. I don't know what Toei Animation is thinking about their Daima release at this point. I'm just speculating because we don't know if they lost their ass on it. We don't know if it was a success based off of what they were aiming for. I don't know what the target of Daima was. Um, Mostly because is this the first mini like Dragon Ball series we've ever had?
Man, I think so. I'm struggling to think of another one.
I mean, the closest thing would be like was GT 60 episodes, I think.
64 episodes. So yeah, that's the next shortest, I think.
I mean, that's still quite a bit more than what Daima was. And you figure a project like this, 20 episodes is, it's not 150 episodes, obviously, but it's not nothing either. That's a lot of lead up production time. You've got to get, 20, slots from the networks. That way they can play your show. Like there's a lot of work that goes into that. And you figure that there's at least a certain amount of money you expect to get back. And I just like to know roughly what their targets were and how they think they did, because it's going to determine whether we get something like Daima ever again.
And that's probably, man, for me that's the biggest bummer because
I love the idea of a 20 episode series.
I mean, that is huge. But in addition to that, this is the 40th anniversary celebration of Dragon Ball. one of the last things, well, the last thing that Akira Toriyama worked on, potentially one of the last pieces of Dragon Ball media that we're ever going to get, especially in terms of animation. Who knows, if we will get more. But one of the things that is going to either encourage or discourage Toei to make more Dragon Ball is how well Daima was received. And based on what we're seeing, it was not received well. Part of that being their own fault in terms of marketing. But I think that that's going to tell Toei, oh, Dragon Ball is a dead franchise. We're not going to do anything else with it. And that sucks. As a Dragon Ball fan, that's really a bummer. I mean, some people, there's arguments to say whether or not it should continue based on the fact that Akira Toriyama is no longer around, but I would still love to see great Dragon Ball content, and I don't think Toei is going to be really incentivized to continue making more.
Yeah, that's my concern as well. Because after seeing all of this, and I mean, it was hard for me to come to the conclusion whether this series was a success or not. Um, and a lot of it just has to do with how much they sunk into it. Because there was viewership. It was popular. It did, hit the top 10 in certain time slots for at least a brief period. And until we get, I'm I'm thinking that maybe next year's like financial like year in review report comes out, we'll probably have the actual information because that's when all the toy sales are going to be hitting and all the merchandise, and we should be able to see the full view at that point. Um, but right now, it seems like Toei Animations mucked a lot of their numbers, and honestly, it seems like they messed up the marketing campaign or the lack thereof. And this feels like a series that was not given a proper chance to breathe. And I'm with you. I'm hoping Toei Animation doesn't learn the wrong lessons from their mistake.
Yeah, I. The funny thing is the last piece of Dragon Ball media that came out before Daima, the Dragon Ball Super superhero movie, there was kind of a similar problem with that, and I think we talked about it when that got released because of the choice to move to like the 3D animation, and people were kind of put off by it. I think it ended up in Japan was not received well, and then like we talked about, once it went abroad, I think it ended up actually doing really well. Not as well as the Broly movie, but its overseas audience really brought in the revenue for that. But I was again, that was another one where I was like, I was super excited to see a story about like Gohan and Piccolo, something that wasn't focused on Goku and Vegeta. And I was worried that Toei or Shueisha or anybody producing Dragon Ball was going to get the wrong idea of like, oh, the fan base doesn't want that. Well, I guess we're going back to it's Goku time.
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah, I don't know. It's Daima is everything about it is just kind of a little bit confusing. It's the point of this series existing is a little bit confusing. The marketing campaign and expectations are confusing, and whether it met those expectations is also a little bit confusing. So I went out to try and shed a little bit more light on this by looking into all this stuff. And honestly, I'm walking away, well, about as confused as I was before, but at least I understand that everybody's confused.
Yeah, same. I struggled, man. I struggled finding numbers for all of this stuff, and you were able to dig up a few more pieces of illuminating information. But yeah, I maybe it's something that we can revisit by the end of the year. I don't know. I'm hoping that we hear more about Daima moving forward, about more Dragon Ball content moving forward. Supposedly, the manga is supposed to be continuing with Toyotaro at the head of it, but there's nothing immediately on the horizon for Dragon Ball animation, and I don't know
That's
if that's
spooky. That's pretty scary.
yeah. I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon, which is a shame.
Well, hopefully, after we post this episode, there's an announcement about the next Dragon Ball series. I love being proven wrong. I can't wait for it.
Same. My fingers are crossed. I'm hoping that in 2025 we get something, whether it's a movie, a new series. I mean, there's 2+ arcs of manga for them to animate, so there's stuff out there.
But I mean, more or less, that was everything I kind of came across. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on here?
I don't think so. I think our takeaway is that the marketing for Daima was not great. Um, and Daima really should have done better numbers, but we weren't able to get as many specifics as we would have liked. But
Yeah, I think it was just a big marketing miss. I don't know. Maybe talk to some people. I don't know. Tell if you need some opinions. I got plenty of them.
that's for sure. We've got plenty of them on recording. Uh, but yeah, spread the word about Daima. I mean, I think it's worth a watch. Some people like it better than the original, or better than GT and Super at the very least. So
Yeah, I
it's in
mean,
the
it's
middle of
not
the
a bad
pack.
series. It's most of our critiques are just it could have been better.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. But I think that's going to be it for this episode of Instant Transmission, where we discuss everything Dragon Ball. This has been your host, Todd.
And Dayton.
Don't forget, we're on Patreon and Discord. If you want to tell us our marketing sucks as much as Daima's, you can find us at patreon.com/ITDBpodcast. The Discord link will be in the episode description, but you can also find it and all of our links at linktree/ITDBpodcast. Thank you all so much for your support. Be sure to join us next time as we have a cordial conversation with Frieza's brother in Cooler's Revenge. Frieza's been defeated by a monkey, and his family cannot let that stand. Cooler arrives on Earth with one goal in mind: kill Goku. Will Goku be able to access his newly acquired Super Saiyan transformation? Will Krillin do more than be a punching bag? Will Cooler have some wild transformation that is totally not inspired by Shredder from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Find out next time. And to all our fellow Dragon Ball fans, stay safe out there, and remember to keep rocking the dragon.
Krillin's just a punching bag, isn't he?
Just a speed bag for all of Dragon Ball's villains.
His poor little head bouncing around.